In this week's video, I'm going to show you how to measure hands for mittens and gloves. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. Before I knit a gift for a friend or family member, I take measurements of their head, hands, and feet, regardless of what it is I'm going to be knitting for that first project. The reason for this is that I never know what I might want to knit in the future, and I don't always have access to them immediately in order to take additional measurements. Today I'm going to show you how to take the essential measurements required in order to knit basic mittens and gloves, but I'm also going to show you how to take additional measurements in order to customize fit. So let's get started. To measure your hand for a mitten, you're going to trace your hand with the fingers closed and the thumb extended. You're going to trace from wrist to wrist. I usually start a little bit before the wrist and end a little after, and then mark that location. So this marks the location of where the wrist actually ends and the hand begins. Next thing I do is measure the circumference of the hand right above where the thumb separates from the hand. The circumference is the key measurement for mittens. It's what the sizes are based on. What you'll get from the tracing are things like length from wrist to where the thumb separates from the hand. You'll get the length of the thumb and the total length of the hand as well. Additional measurements you might want to take are the circumference of the thumb, as well as the length of the arm, the forearm from the wrist to the elbow, and then take circumference measurements of the wrist, the midpoint of the arm, and then right before the elbow here. The reason for that is that sometimes you want to knit longer gloves, and people really vary in terms of how quickly their arm gets larger. So for most ribbed mittens where you only have a couple of inches, whatever the number you need for the hand is usually just fine for the arm and the wrist. But if you're going to design a more fitted glove that isn't ribbed, or if you want to extend it much further, you're going to need those extra measurements. To measure for a glove is similar to measuring for a mitten. You start measuring, you trace the hand with fingers open, tracing from wrist to wrist. And once again, I mark the location of where the wrist actually starts compared to the hand. You're going to need to take the circumference of your hand just above the thumb, just as for a mitten. The tracing of the glove is going to give you additional key lengths that you need to work gloves. Not just the separation of the thumb, but also the separation for the small finger and the middle fingers, which are not at the same length. So people's palms will vary in length from here to here, and they will vary in length from where the pinky separates to where these other two fingers separates. In addition, you'll also get the complete length of each of the fingers. Just as for mittens, the extra measurements I would take would be the length of the forearm and the wrist, mid forearm, and circumference of the arm just before the elbow. I keep a file folder of all the measurements I've taken of my friends and family members. As you build your file folder, I would suggest if you are measuring for a child, just take the measurements that you are going to need this year, because that kid's going to grow and the measurements will be meaningless next year. But if you're going to be knitting for an adult, I would take the complete set of head, hand, and foot measurements, including the additional measurements that you might need to customize fit. Even if your skills are pretty basic right now, they won't be in the future, and you are going to want to knit more challenging projects. So it's best to just be prepared when that happens. If you'd like to see my previous videos on how to measure or on surprise gift knitting, you can see my playlist right there. And if you're not already a subscriber, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe. You can mouse over my face here and click on subscribe, or if you're on a mobile device, you can tap on my face and then tap subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.